I've chosen to read this presentation. It is a collection of quotes from several prominent thinkers. I begin with Marcus Aurelius. He reigned as Roman Empire from 161 to 180 years after the birth of Christ. Considered a Stoic, he is referred to as the philosopher king. He is attributed with this saying: everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. Another saying, in the form of a prayer attributed to Reinhold Niebuhr, pleads, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. In the opening remarks of Athene's theory of everything, he states, the more attached we are to a belief system, the less we are able to make conscious choices for ourselves. But by observing this process, we expand our awareness and enhance our free will. It is said that wisdom comes with age, but with openness and skepticism, the key principles of the scientific method, we don't need decades of trial and error. In fact, we don't have decades of trial and error to sort out which of our convictions may be improbable. The question is not whether our beliefs are right or wrong, but whether or not being emotionally attached to them is more or less likely to benefit us. There is no such thing as free choice while being emotionally attached to a belief system. The moment we are self-aware enough to realize this, we are free to join with others and figure out the real odds of what will benefit us the most. There are structured sets of actions that are considered science, and they include the following: empirical observation, replicable experiments, provisional results, such as if new data arises that contradicts a theory, that theory must be modified. It strives also to be an objective approach. It relies on facts and on the world as it is, rather than on our beliefs, wishes, or desires. Science determines facts based on data that anyone at any time can verify, see, measure, and be confident. Science does not include things that are subjective or that can vary widely by experience, opinion, perception, or history, person to person, like philosophy, politics, or religion. Systematic observation is a part of the scientific method. It relies on carefully planned studies rather than on random or haphazard observation. It is true that we all have strong feelings about many things. In fact, dialogue about those feelings and what to do about the core issues that arise from them are critical to change the world. That said, it's still important to remember the defining difference between feelings and science. If you aren't sure about anything you read, luckily it's easy enough to Google a legitimate body of research to either make you more confident of your stance or give you information to do additional research or modify your ideas. We all have smart friends with strong feelings. That makes it even more important to separate feelings from science. We can have strong feelings about something while we can simultaneously still be misinformed about reality. It's really easy to do today when we spend a lot of time in echo chambers on social media, being fed more of exactly what we already think. We are fed in our news feeds and on our phones and computers more of what we already read about, talk about, or like, combined with confirmation bias, which is a tendency to look for evidence that what we have already concluded is true. We are slow to change our conclusions. When in doubt, science is the one authority that strives to be unbiased and not based on simply reflecting back on what we know, think about ourselves, or our worldview. This is encouraged by our UU principles, including the one that says the primacy of reason. Taking a deeper look at how our mind works, scientists have observed that most brain activity is background noise. That's the upending of our understanding of consciousness. What are you thinking about right now? Have you ever wondered why it is so hard to answer this simple question? There is a reason. 95% of your brain activity is entirely unconscious. Of the remaining 5% of brain activity, only around half is intentionally directed. The vast majority of what goes on in our heads is unknown and unintentional. Neuroscientists call these activities spontaneous fluctuations because they are unpredictable and seemingly unconnected to any specific behavior. No wonder it's hard to say what we are thinking or feeling, and why we like to think of ourselves as CEOs of our own mind. We are much more like ships tossed at sea. What does this reveal about the nature of consciousness? Why is our brain, a mere 2% of our body mass, using 20% of our energy to produce what many scientists still call background noise? Neuroscientists have known about these random fluctuations in electrical brain activity since the 30s, but have not known what to make of them until recently. Many brain studies of consciousness still look only at brain activity that responds to external stimuli and triggers a mental state. The rest of the noise is averaged out of the data. This is still the prevailing approach in most contemporary neuroscience and yields a computational input-output model of consciousness. In this neuroscientific model, so-called information transfers from our senses to our brains. Yet the pioneering French neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene considers this view deeply wrong. Spontaneous activity is one of the most frequently overlooked features of consciousness. He writes, unlike engineers who design digital transistors with discrete voltage for 0 and 1 to resist background noise, neurons in the brain work differently. Neurons amplify the noise and even use it to help generate novel solutions to complex problems. In part, this is why the neural architecture of our brain has a branching fractal geometry and not a linear one. The vast majority of our brain activity proceeds divergently, creating many possible associations and not convergently into just one. Spontaneous fluctuations make up the vast majority of brain activity, yet are frequently ignored because of their unpredictability. As a philosopher of science and consciousness, the author believed that any future progress in our understanding of consciousness or artificial intelligence needs to start from these understudied fluctuations and work our way up. We are at an exciting tipping point where a new theory of consciousness based on spontaneous fluctuations is emerging. In fact, they've explored ways of intervening with depression and anxiety and other mental conditions by increasing the amount of these spontaneous fluctuations. And it works something like again, this is a crude analogy, but an etch and sketch, where we kind of clear the patterns that are there. And although there may be some traces, it's much easier to write down a new pattern. Scientists are still in the early stages of experimenting with these mysterious cognitive fluctuations. They hold the key to a paradigm shift in the theories of consciousness and mental health at a moment in the grips of pandemic when we need them the most. Teilhard de Chardin, Jesuit priest, paleontologist, mystic, described a cosmic evolution of a postulated sphere or stage of evolution, dominated by consciousness, the mind, and interpersonal relations, frequently referenced in his writing. Creatures evolve a new biosphere that emerges, and it produces something that is referred to as the noosphere. That's the harmonic interaction of all these unconscious fluctuations, whether they be within the individual or the group. Creatures evolve, a new biosphere emerges, and with it a new noosphere. The noosphere is at least a philosophical concept developed and popularized by Vernadsky and Chardin, and is defined as a new state of the biosphere described as a planetary sphere of reason. There is a quote from Pierre de Chardin that is not only one of his best known, but also one of his most beautiful. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, We shall harness for God the energies of love, and then for a second time in the history of the world, we'll have discovered fire. Hopefully we can figure out how we do that. Fire is a powerful symbol for both creative and destructive forces. The biggest obstacle to creating mindfulness is our negative bias. Yes, we all have a negative bias, which causes us to focus on and recall the negative over the positive thoughts, memories, and experiences. Our brain is constantly scanning the environment, and our mind is usually running a commentary of self-criticism, judgment, and overall fear-based amygdala-centered thoughts. And the neuropsychology to empower you for when you understand how much of this challenge of maintaining a practice is because you are a human in a fear-focused, stressed out society, then you are likely to go easy on yourself, realizing mindfulness isn't hard for you, it's challenging for everyone to maintain, let alone master. When practicing mindfulness, we are likely to become increasingly aware of our inner dialogue, and the following thoughts are characteristic. Oh my God, I'm going crazy. I'm having more thoughts than I was before. And I am so negative and neurotic. I'm so judgmental of others. I hate myself. I need a therapist. So here we are. What can we do? We will have an impact. There's no question about that. Do we want to have a conscious impact, leave a lasting human impact? I wonder, could it be somehow that the way to have the greatest impact is to have very little impact at all? United, we have a better chance of understanding what's so, and the wisdom to identify the answer to the so what questions. That takes me to the issue of how diversity fits into our evolution. There are many paths to diversity. Diversity enhances requisite variety. Requisite variety is the variety required to give life its best chance of continuing. Hope lets us dream. Hope lets us try. May we think of our freedom not as the right to do what we please, but as the opportunity to do what is right. May we accept ambiguity as the root of our freedom and questioning as freedom's wings. Projecting outward to the year 2040, one report states, human responses to these core drivers, to these basic animal instincts, and the emerging dynamics will determine how the world evolves during the next 2 decades. That's the key concept right there. Projecting outward to 2040, 2 decades, our human responses to these core drivers that motivate us and stir us into action, and the emerging dynamic that results will determine how the world evolves during the next 2 decades. The paper's most optimistic scenario is one it dubs a renaissance of democracies, in which the world is in the midst of a resurgence of open democracies led by the United States and its allies. Wouldn't that be wonderful? At this point, I would like to one more time visit the poem shared with us by Amanda Gorman at the inauguration of President Joe Biden. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms of notions of what just is isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours. Before we knew it, somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country in a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to glade, the hill that we climb. If only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust, for we all have our eyes on the future. Victory has its eyes on us. History has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inactions and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. And every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country, our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge. Battered and beautiful. The new day comes. We step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new day blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And I conclude with these words. Individual and global human consciousness moving from fear to love is the realm of the continuing evolution of the universe. Amen.